Well, hello, eighth grade. Try and make this one a little shorter than the last one. Did get dressed up though. We're going to talk about World War One and U.S. involvement in World War One and the end of World War One. So, when all these European powers start declaring war on each other in August, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson makes very clear that the United States is not going to be involved. Pledges neutrality, which means that the U.S. can do its time-honored tradition of supplying goods to the belligerents that are fighting in the war and make money off of other people's suffering. And it should be noted that number one trading partner is Britain or United Kingdom at this time. So really, most of what we're supplying is going to the Entente powers, France, Russia, England, versus the Central powers, Germany and Austria. So Germany has a large U-boat fleet, submarines, and they want to stop supplies from reaching England and France, and so they do unrestricted submarine warfare, which means that submarines are very helpless once they're spotted, especially if they're on the surface, and so their primary weapon is their stealth, and so versus previous maritime tradition where you might board a ship and check to see what's on board, submarines would just fire torpedoes and sink ships without any sort of, check of were there weapons on board. So the Lusitania, unfortunately, is sunk. Over 1,200 people die, including 128 Americans. Originally, it was denied that there was anything on board, but it came to light later that there was at least small arms ammunition, maybe other weapons of war on board. So, certainly doesn't justify the loss of civilian life, but it is interesting in that the Germans were trying to strangle any sort of supplies from reaching Europe, and this was part of their strategy. In January 1917, the Zimmermann telegram is intercepted. It's actually to an ambassador in Mexico, and it's basically the German government authorizing him to approach Mexico and say, hey, if you join the war and we beat the U.S., you can have all that land back that the U.S. took from you in the Mexican-American War. Obviously, Mexico doesn't do this, but it really incites the American public, and kind of back to the idea of the Spanish-American War and journalism kind of like, pumping people up. And then in February 1917, the Germans had suspended unrestricted submarine warfare for a couple years after the Lusitania, but they restarted it. So again, public opinion in America is starting to turn against Germany and the Central Powers. So in February of 1917, after this unrestricted submarine warfare starts, $250 million bill is passed to expand the U.S. military. So clearly the U.S. is considering war at this point. 5 more U.S. ships are sunk. Woodrow Wilson, the president, asks Congress to declare war on April 2nd. And Congress does declare war by April 6th, and pretty overwhelming majorities for both the Senate and the House, as you can see there. So real quick, I just want to talk about the first U.S. unit to see action in Europe. It was the 369th Infantry Regiment, also called the Harlem Hellfighters. They showed up in Europe, and they were originally doing some supply duties, and the French and English were very upset. They needed troops in the line. They've been fighting for 4 years. And so this infantry regiment was given to the French. And the French didn't care who they got, right? They had no problem with the fact that this was an all African-American unit. So they went into battle before other U.S. forces, and early on their 2 privates, Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts, were the first Americans to receive the Croix de Guerre, which is the French equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. They held a position against 100 and some Germans, and incidentally, 97 years later, 2015, awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor finally by Barack Obama. Oh, and of note here, you can see wearing a French helmet. So clearly, these soldiers have been added to the French army. All right. So first battle I want to talk about for the U.S. is the Battle of Marne, called the Second Battle of Marne. If you remember, back in 1914, the Germans had almost captured Paris, but they were held at the Marne being a river. So in this particular one, it's the last German offensive of the war. They've been fighting for 4 years, even though they've pretty much ended the war on the eastern and southern fronts, Italy and Russia. they're just they're kind of reaching the end of their both their food and their ability to make ammunition. As you can see here, there's about 120,000 Allied casualties. That's the French, British, and American altogether. Germans, 169,000. It just kind of highlights the defensive advantage in the war. If you're in a trench, you're firing machine guns, you're shooting artillery, and everybody else is running across this, wide open land right here because there's no trees, no grass, nothing left. Clearly, the advantage is to the defender. So the next battle is the Battle of Musargan. And that is an Allied offensive. And as you can see here, it's almost 2-to-1, Americans and French, 192,000 casualties versus only 100,000 for the Germans. So the Germans lose less people. Again, they're fighting defensively at this point. But they see the material wealth of the Americans. Any Americans that they capture, they're amazed at the quality of their boots, of their uniforms, of the food they're carrying, of their weapons. And so they see the writing on the wall after this battle. There's also the battle where Sergeant Alvin York came to fame. He was a soldier that had penetrated into German lines by himself and was sniping off and killed 20-some Germans, and the other 100 and something Germans that were in this trench surrendered to him. He did not have to wait 97 years to get his Congressional Medal of Honor. He was a white sergeant from Tennessee and received his Congressional Medal of Honor the next year. So what are the costs of World War I? 20 million lives, that's both civilian and military, about roughly 10 million. Another 20 million casualties, whether those are wounds caused from weapons or sickness. The war itself cost over $300 billion, the most expensive war up until that time. Over 1 million Africans died. If you remember, there was that map of Africa was all carved up. Only Liberia and Ethiopia were independent. So everywhere else, Africans are fighting this war that they have nothing to do with. That was really started by sort of European nationalism. Land issues were created as a result of the armistice. The armistice goes into effect November 11th. We call it Veterans Day, but it was originally Armistice Day to end World War I. But it affected World War II, Germany, land that was taken, Poland's kind of the way it was created. Yugoslavia was a bunch of countries kind of mashed together, ethnicities mashed together. So those all lead to problems, during and after World War II. And then even today in the Middle East, a lot of the problems occur directly from how the Middle East was split up after World War I. Russian Revolution also occurs. That's another 5 million people dying from civil war and famine. I mean, really, that happens in conjunction with World War I. I mean, you could say 25 million lives were lost. And then total war is now an accepted concept. I say accepted. I mean, there's certainly limitations. People don't want to see chemical weapons again. Those are banned. And in general, there are quote-unquote rules of war. But the idea now that potentially anyone's a target, that you mobilize the entire population, not just professional soldiers, that the economy of the country, everything that you're doing, buying, selling, trading is in some way geared towards the war effort. Those become ideas that exist through World War II. And after World War II, we get more into proxy wars and limited wars. I mean, technically, we're still in war with Afghanistan. We certainly don't have the entire population mobilized or the economy. So total war is still exists as an idea, but one has not been fought in a long time. So just to make sure that you're watching, that you're paying attention, what I want from you now is down in the comments to write about an idea, something that you would like to do some extra research on. And what we're going to do is on Friday, you're going to go ahead and email me a time where you'd like to meet on Google Hangout, preferably in the morning sometime. On Friday, and you just access Google Hangouts directly from your Google Chrome page. The same way you would get to like documents, that drop down there, one of the options is Google Hangouts. If you're having problems, you can send me a quick email and I'll walk you through it. But we're all going to meet and talk briefly, just a few minutes on Friday via Google Hangouts. So probably about every 5 minutes I'll be able to talk to someone. And I just want to know what you want to do some extra research on for World War I, and we'll talk about what that'll look like. And then we'll have another meeting in a week where you'll actually go ahead and, sorry, phone call. We'll have another meeting where you'll actually present what you researched and what you learned about. All right. Well, hopefully that was a little shorter, and I hope you guys have a good weekend. If I don't hear from you again, oh no, I will hear from you again because you're going to set up a time to talk to me on Friday. So, anyway, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.